Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Hannah Kaspira, and I am the Division Director with Robert Half Talent Solutions in Calgary. I have the honor of leading a fantastic team of technology recruiters across Alberta. Thank you so much for joining for this panel discussion today. I'm thrilled to be hosting this event in partnership with Chic Geek, which is an incredible organization building a supportive community where tech-enabled women can advance their careers. So data shows that women hold only 20% of overall technology roles, and 56% of mid-career women in tech end up leaving their companies. That's twice as many as their male counterparts. In fact, a study by Indeed found the biggest reason women leave tech is a lack of career growth or career trajectory. So today we're going to be exploring this conversation around the importance of women in tech. How do we keep them engaged? And how do we support their success in this ever-changing industry? But before we begin, I would like to address a few housekeeping items. We will be recording today's webinar and it will be available for on-demand viewing. A follow-up email with a link to the recording will be shared after the event. We also will have a Q&A at the end of the discussion, so please enter your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll do our best to answer as many as possible. We're really excited to see all your questions come in. We'd really like to make this an interactive experience, so we'll have 3 polling questions throughout the session for you to pay attention to and contribute to the discussion today. We encourage you to take part and help us get a real-time sense of where everyone is at in relation to the conversation at hand. All your responses will be completely anonymous. All right, so without further ado, it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our phenomenal panelists today. So in no particular order, we have Chelsea Squires, who is a senior data analyst at Cement. After 5 years of working in the energy industry as a geophysicist for Shell and CNRL, Chelsea pivoted to a role in tech as a senior data analyst and is pursuing her Master's of Science degree in analytics at U of C. Next, we have Hanan Shabib. She is a program specialist at Chic Geek, and she's worked across multiple industries in her career. And at Chic Geek, she leads the behind the scenes development for all the new and upcoming programs to support career development for women in tech. Marjorie Junio Reed is the Chief Financial Officer for Helsum. Prior to joining Helsum, Marjorie was the treasury manager for a multinational oil and gas company where she oversaw corporate finance, treasury accounting, and treasury operation duties in addition to management responsibilities, which I'm really excited about hearing about today. And then finally, we have Teresa Smith. She is the data strategy lead at Sustainable Development Technology Canada. She loves liaising between groups that understand business goals and those with the technical expertise to find the best solutions. Teresa is also the founder of Women in Data Calgary Meetup, a director with the YYC Data Society, and the key organizer of the YYC Data Convention. Welcome, and thank you all for joining the discussion today. Now, before we dive in to kick everything off, I would love to get a sense of who we have as part of the audience today. So let's start with our first polling question. So how many years of experience do you have in the technology industry? Less than 1 year, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 plus years, or none at all? Today's discussion, we're really hoping to have a well-rounded discussion about all those career levels. So we're happy to have anyone in this discussion for sure. We'll just wait for that to pop up. Here we go. Hopefully you all can see those. So we've got a pretty even mix. We've got 2 to 5 years and 10 plus years kind of in the middle. No one with 5 to 10 years. So that interestingly factors into our discussion really, really well today, with it being so prevalent for people in that mid-level of their career to drop out of tech. So really interesting, maybe related, maybe not. And then quite a lot with less than 1 year of experience and none. So welcome to everyone. We're so excited to have you here. So with that being said, why don't we hop right into our first panel question? And this one's going to go over to Marjorie. So Marjorie, how do you feel that diversity affects a company's overall success, both in your current team and in your previous experience?
Yeah, so first I can talk specifically about Helsum. I think for Helsum, it is absolutely critical to our success. So, as give a little bit of background at the beginning, but we are a payments provider for small and medium-sized businesses. So, in both Canada and the US, so we enable a bunch of small business owners to get paid and to support, their needs with their business with different sorts of tools. And we know that our small business owners are incredibly diverse in terms of their ethnicity, their education, socioeconomic standing, gender, religion. They've just got, incredibly diverse small business owners that are, really the lifeblood of our economy and their communities. And I really believe that reflecting that in our team, the people building the products, talking to them on the phone with customer service, um, all of that, we create a better product for our small business owners that really has them in mind and lets them know that we're really rooting for their business to succeed and wanting to support them in their endeavors. So that's firstly, for Helsum specifically, the nature of our business, we want to reflect the diversity of our customers with the diversity of our team. Secondly, I really believe that you don't know what you don't know. So if any of you have read the book, which I really highly recommend, it's called Super Pumped, and it's about the rise and fall of Uber. I'll bet those tech bros at Uber thought they had a pretty successful team and they didn't need a lot of diversity. But if you read the book, it's a salacious book in terms of kind of what goes on and how I think just echoes of yourself and people like you, their opinions can sort of perpetuate and really lead a company or a culture down a path that I don't think was necessarily intended. So, without diversity, you don't really know your blind spots. And I think where there could be missed opportunities in terms of strategy or really legitimate risks that you're just not aware of, diversity really brings those to the forefront with different perspectives, different ideas, different backgrounds, and I think it's really important for any company in this day and age to succeed. And the third thing for me is, at Helsum, we're really trying to attract the best people for our team. And who are those people? They're passionate, they're talented, they're engaged, and they're really committed to our mission. And I really believe that those people want to see diversity in their workplace because they know that they can bring their whole selves to work and they can bring their best selves to work and they know it's the right thing to do. So I feel like there's a lot more expectation for team members out of their employer as to like what they expect and what they want their team to be. And I truly believe in this day and age is that's the expectation and that's what we need to step up to if we want to hire the best people. I've been really lucky in terms of my career in having you know workplaces or bosses that support diversity, whether that's sort of perpetuated company wide as, here, like, there's always parts to improve, I think. But I know here at Helsum, when I joined, it was really for me a big draw that our CEO, Nick, really cared about creating a diverse and empowered workplace. He knew me. I'm a mom. I have a 4-year-old. I'm the out of our executive team of 4. I'm the woman on the team, so I bring a different perspective. And I think knowing that he sort of embraced that different perspective and wanted that different perspective really attracted me to coming on to Helsum.
That's amazing. I know that that book is going to be top of people's list if it's not already. I'm
It's
going
a
to have to
great book.
order that. Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right in what you said about people now expecting diversity from the teams and the companies that they start to work for. I can say that, even in the last 2 years, the number of individuals who are looking for diverse workplaces and an emphasis on promoting that has drastically increased. So it's awesome that Helsum is really stepping up to that plate. So with that being said, we're going to jump into our next polling questions. So polling question number 2 is, have you personally ever felt like leaving, or have you made the decision to leave the technology industry? So your options, it's absolutely crossed my mind. I did choose to leave. I left, but have since returned. We've got a few boomerangers here actually. And no, it's never occurred to me to leave. We'll just wait for a few responses to come in here. Can we vote now? Oh, I can vote too. I'm going to vote. Awesome. It's absolutely crossed my mind as a close second to no. It's never occurred to leave. A few in I did choose to leave, and a few in I left but have since returned. Interesting. Excellent. Well, that's going to really help with leading into our next question, which I'm actually going to send over to Teresa to kick off the conversation for this one, which is, have you ever felt like leaving the tech industry? If so, what helped you to remain motivated to stay in technology? And if you did leave, what made you come back?
Yeah, I absolutely am in that first category. I have thought about leaving, and what kept me in it was really under learning from being out in the community that I'm not alone in terms of the things that I was struggling with. Certainly, imposter syndrome was a big part of it, and and the other thing that really helped was straight up therapy. So I definitely recommend talk therapy to people who are struggling with things like that, um, because it does make a big difference. And I think it's something that I've found a lot of women in this space struggle with, and it does lead to a lot of burnout and unnecessary anxiety.
Absolutely. I can attest to the feeling of burnout that comes when you don't feel like you've got a community to support you, for sure. Absolutely. And then why don't we get Hanan's perspective on this as well? Hanan, what about you? Have you left tech? What helped you come back? I think you're a boomeranger, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
am a boomeranger. So I've entered into tech from a different industry altogether, stepped out of tech and then back into tech. And for me, a lot of like the decisions that I had to make was about opportunity. And we do hear from a lot of women in the space around being able to see like a really clear trajectory for your career and like where the opportunities and where the growth might be. And I found myself in a really excellent supportive role in tech as my first tech job. And I was really lucky because I was actually working with primarily a female team. We only had actually one male on our team. So I really lucked out in that sense. But I really did find that what I really desired and what the challenge that I really wanted was to build something. And so in order to do that, I actually took an opportunity outside of tech to do that. It was still within a field where I could talk about tech and maybe do some encouraging around tech, but it wasn't strictly a technology play. And then as a result of like that, I actually ended up working for an arts organization and taking a lot of sort of like my tech learnings and understanding how technology and software and understanding data and how you can look at data and utilize it to make differences in your business practice as an arts organization. That's what led me to work in that sort of regard. And then I really did sort of like after this pandemic, really crave working for organizations that had the same kind of alignment in terms of my values. And that meant a company that showed kindness and showed a lifting up of others in terms of their values. And so that's actually what brought me back into tech is working with Chic Geek. And again, super lucky that I get to work with an all-female team at Chic Geek.
I know they feel very lucky to have you as well. I know the impact that you've already made for the team. Kylie has spoken about it a lot, so that's awesome. Um, Fantastic. So with coming back, it seems like there's a lot that you were able to learn and bring from one opportunity to another, which is amazing. You know, whether you're in or out of tech, there's definitely some transferable things that you can learn along the way. So let's jump into question 3, Hanan. I'd love to hear about what changes you would make in the IT industry to keep intermediate level women in tech a little bit more committed to staying, and maybe what you've learned from that perspective along the way.
Yeah, happy to. So a lot of the work that Chic Geek does is sort of looking at what is happening with women in mid-career in tech. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about this, but what they're finding or what we've heard is that there's sort of a lack of role models within leadership and seeing themselves within their own companies. Also sort of a lack of having an opportunity to talk to a peer group about the struggles that they're going through, or maybe trying to get the answers that they need within their own careers. And so, you know, I have been really lucky. I started off with a really great support group of women who all worked in tech. Surprisingly enough, I have 4 of my best friends all work in tech and have stayed in tech. And I've had opportunities to work in companies and tech companies that are all sort of primarily female, but I recognize that that is a privilege and a benefit that not many people get. And so with Chic Geek, they wanted to sort of solve for that sort of like leaky funnel. And so one of the programs that got brought into play is career pathing. The reason why I'm bringing that up is when people sign up to career pathing, we ask them really some key questions. First, what are you looking for when you come onto that platform? And then what are some of the changes that you'd like to see in the industry? And we find that the answers that people provide us are fairly uniform. And so in terms of like, why are people signing up for career pathing? Again, professional development. They specifically want access to women in the industry that they can ask questions for or to and get answers from. And then also like just connecting and understanding that there is a lot of women in the space and what are they going through and how are they achieving their goals. And then when we ask around like, where do you want to see the improvements for women in the industry in the future, some really key things come up. And so these are sort of the kinds of things that organizations should be thinking about if they haven't already started to think about. And then also the kinds of things that like, you know, maybe they need to start implementing. So the words, a lot of like sort of like the answers that we're getting are things like pay equity, transparency around salaries, right? So when you do have a job posting out there and you're not putting in the opportunity for people to see, sometimes what ends up happening, and you may be sort of aware that it's happening, but you don't know if it's happening for sure, is as a female, are you getting a different pay scale than maybe your male counterparts, you know? And so as an organization, are you actually thinking about what that means when you're not showing your salaries or being transparent about that? So pay equity is really important for women in tech, as well as like flexibility in work arrangements. And we heard Marjorie talking about this within Healthsome. She's a mom of a 4-year-old. And what does that mean in terms of her schedule, her availability, the expectation of how available you are? And one of the key things that a lot of our users have been also sharing with us is paternity leave. And when we think about like having your male partner having the choice to be able to leave and take a leave to care for your family, that gives the female in that partnership the opportunity, or the partner in that to have the opportunity of staying within the workforce and not seeing a gap or feeling like they have to make a choice between the two. And so when you think about like that kind of environment that you're creating, are you creating an environment which allows people to make those choices for themselves? And sometimes when you're looking at a job posting, you can't see whether or not that's very clear. And so what kinds of expectations are you setting for women in your organization? Another thing that a lot of them talk about are gender biases, the kinds of languages that are being used within the organization, the kinds of hiring practices that are within the organization. And we're not always conscious of the fact that some of the language that we use is actually gender specific or gender coded. And I'm sure Hannah and Robert Half can talk about this. But when you talk about like wanting a rock star or wanting someone to hustle within your organization or your company, you don't realize that that's a very masculine coded term, and that might actually put someone else off from it as well. And I can see that Chelsea has put in gender decoder, which is really awesome because that's actually exactly the example that I was taking from. And then also they want training, DEI training in their companies and organizations, not necessarily for themselves specifically, but for everyone else within their company and organization. And they want to see those voices actually coming from women and other marginalized and minority groups. So when you're creating those kinds of training programs, are you actually lifting up the individuals in your own organization that represents that? And are you asking permission for them to do that? Because again, you don't want to set up an environment where they're not feeling comfortable or they're feeling tokenized. And so those are some of the key things that we have learned just by asking the question about what do women want. So I hope that that helps sort of start the conversation of like, what are the kinds of changes we need to see?
That's phenomenal. It's really interesting to hear, and especially because it's real data that you as an organization are collecting. It's incredible to have that, and hopefully you'll start to see some of that change as these programs continue to roll out across tech in Alberta, which is awesome. Why don't we go to Chelsea for that same question? Because Chelsea, you have a little different experience than Hanan here, being kind of that intermediate level woman in tech. So I'd love to hear from you what changes you would like to see to keep women a little more committed to staying in the tech industry.
I found it really interesting listening to Hanan's answer, because a lot of the things that I just put as the ideas that I felt or I imagined myself, it just had the data to back that. And I think that a lot of the issues that we see from an organizational perspective or from an industry perspective, one of the very difficult things about it is I think almost especially as tech professionals, we want to think X is the problem, Y is the solution, but I think it's much more of a less tangible and culture embedded issue than that. So really, there is a need for continuity in the programs across what's going to be ultimately filling in those gaps. So the way I considered it is when you're already within an organization, it's so important to be creating accommodation for exposure to different roles, for growth, and for allyship, much like the Chic Geek career pathing program. I think just being able to see from not only the hard skills, but the soft skills of where different roles have gotten their experience from, and different things that different leaders and especially women leaders have gone through across their pathways. It really helps expand what ultimately the opportunities could be in that particular role or within that organization. And I think it's also important to put that forward so that men or any other diverse group can also gain benefit from seeing, yeah, these people have different experiences, and that's very important to recognize. So not allowing for the space for those conversations to be had is extremely detrimental to be able to have, I think, growth in that space. But I think also from a recruiting standpoint, understanding where your company's core values are and understanding where the talent that you want to be drawing from, where their core values are. I think there's a new kind of shift to the age-old adage of do what makes you happy and align with what you value. That was a really key reason of why I wanted to shift over to Cement. Empathy and being bold are very key values that they have, which were both kind of key areas that I didn't feel that was being filled for me at the company I was in before. There's also Emily Chang, who's a BBC Tech former correspondent. She wrote a great book, Brotopia. It's talking about the idea that there's things being done, especially in Silicon Valley, on a less in a less diverse way that are being masked as being defined by meritocracy. So I think we've all heard it's like, oh, we don't do gender quotas, we don't even track that, we just go for the best person for the job. But I would really want to question the recruiting practices to understand, well, what's your definition of that? And actually, I found a quote from Jody Gondek that Direct Her, which is an organization that connects women to being able to be more present on boards, which is it's important to make sure that the way we're doing recruitment involves casting the net wider. So I think it's challenging that definition. Merit can be defined by a lot of other things other than, honestly, the bros you went to school with. And I think by making sure that both the industries that we're to kind of have this communication with the companies that we're applying to, but also demanding that in the interview process. I had some great conversations with friends of mine that have been applying for new jobs, and that's the things that they ask off the bat. What are you doing to ensure diversity? And what does it mean to you to ensure flexibility and that the needs of your women and diverse groups are being met? And even today, even with organizations that kind of have some of these things on paper, I'll bring it back to, it just seems like they want the Y solution for the X problem. But once you kind of peel back the layers of that, it actually wasn't solving it at all, because it wasn't kind of diving into that culture. So yeah, I think it's both on within the, or I guess 3 ways in the organization, different ways that you can create that accommodation space from the recruiting side, making sure that there's a good knowledge base and a good definition of what does merit mean for a job, and on us as people that are applying to organizations to be sure that it's not just a lip service or not just virtue signaling for the sake of they're saying they're checking a box.
Love that. That was phenomenal answer. Thank you, Chelsea. Yeah, I love when you said casting a wide net. We use that terminology all the time within my team, especially of how wide can we cast this net, filter out later, but how wide can we cast the net, right? Absolutely amazing. Cool. Well, we'll move on to our next question, and we will have Marjorie kick this one off, and then maybe Teresa, if you're okay with answering afterwards. So, Marjorie, I would love to ask you about your perspective as a leader, specifically in technology. What challenges do you face as a leader at Helsum, or as a female leader just in general in technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are challenges that I think any female leader faces, regardless of industry. The ones that I sort of come to mind for me. The first one, and Teresa kind of touched on it, and it's a big challenge for me as well, is the imposter syndrome. So in terms of how I view what's expected of me, or how I view how I'm doing a good job, um, it's a challenge every day to sort of make sure I'm viewing that in the right way, and like really considering not just my own self-critical nature of, oh, I should have said it this way. Am I good at my job? They didn't necessarily take my opinion. Does that mean that I'm not doing a good job? These things are things I have to sort of battle for myself every day. And I think it's actually interesting. I've shared that with a lot of the team members here at Helsum, and I think it's been really good for them to know that that challenge can be shared by anyone, regardless of where you are in an organization and regardless of your gender. Because I do think females are definitely maybe more prone to feeling this way, but it's not necessarily only women that feel this way. So sort of managing that imposter syndrome, talking through it, making sure I'm sort of putting that in the right context is something that I definitely face as a leader, as a female leader. Also, balancing work life and home life. I mean, at any startup or scale up, just the expectation of what our ambitions are and what needs to be done to achieve those ambitions are different, I think, than if you were going to work at a big company government job, let's say. So trying to balance, even with all the accommodations and all the flexibility that I have with my role, still balancing that and feeling good about that, not feeling the guilt, trying to balance that out is something that I definitely struggle with. And then also setting a good example. I'm not sure who had said it, but I do really believe that a lot of women struggle because they believe they can't be what they can't see. So in terms of being a female leader, I really do, I'm very aware of the example and the voice that I can give to my team members. And it's a challenge for me. It's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge because I really want to make sure I'm putting my best foot forward, finding ways to encourage the women on our team, as well as outside of our team, both externally and internally, to make sure that they can feel empowered to join tech, embrace challenges, including taking on leadership, which I think is something that we have a very young team. Maybe they're not necessarily considering it at this point, and just making sure, talking through why they haven't considered it, what they feel might be a barrier for them. Let's talk through that, and just making them aware that this is an option, and they're absolutely capable and empowered to do that if that's what they want. Setting that a good example is always something on my mind, and is a challenge for me every day.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge challenge for me as well. I find for me as a leader to my team, even asking for help can be really challenging, and trying to be a good example of that specifically, and making sure I'm, being asking for help and feeling like that's something that I can lead my team to do as well. I find that that's an area that I really struggle to be an example in, but it's really important, I think, as well. So Marjorie, thanks for those thoughts. Teresa, what about you? What's some of the challenges that you find you faced as a leader in tech?
Yeah, a lot of what Marjorie was saying resonates with me as well. And certainly what you guys were just talking about being a role model and encouraging people. One thing I've really tried to do, especially with the females that I work with, but with some of the males as well, especially during COVID times, is just check in and give them the opportunity to be vulnerable by like specifically asking questions about how vulnerable they're feeling. Um, and asking questions about things like imposter syndrome, and try to normalize that conversation a little bit. I think that that's something that's really important for making everyone feel comfortable and supported and valued, as part of the team. Because then when I identify that it's happening, I can say, well, here's where the value comes in. And, I have one of the things I've struggled with in trying to become a leader in this space, and this ties with the topic of the conversation around career paths and getting into career trajectories in the space, is that the kinds of things that I'm interested in doing revolve around community building, trying to dive into the problems and understand them, trying to bring groups together to talk about good solutions, and trying to create strategy and create community around these questions. And in a lot of industries, especially large corporations, that's not a career trajectory. There's no path to become that. And this ties with what Hannah was saying about, she wanted to build something and she wasn't being given the opportunity to do that. The career paths that were available to me were very much become better at data science, or become a data architect, or manage people. And none of those were really quite what I wanted to do. So I had to workshop, and luckily I had a leader who was willing to do this with me. I had to workshop. The job title data strategist didn't exist. We came up with that, because that's what I was doing. But no one really knows what that means still. It's constant work in progress to educate people about what I'm doing and why it's important. And I know from talking to women in my Women in Data group that a lot of them are saying, well, I'm seeing all these roles that they have all these technical requirements, but what I'm really passionate about is understanding the problem. And yeah, I think that companies need to start recognizing that that's a really important skill set that they actually need more of. But it is hard to write a resume around, or like a job description around asking for that kind of thing. So yeah, to Chelsea's point about recruiting better, one thing that I spent a lot of time doing in my previous role was just working with HR to say, stop asking for all of this stuff that is going to scare women away. I want the women to apply, and therefore I don't want you to ask for 12 programming languages. And so having that conversation, because my male colleagues, they were like, oh, we really want to interview women, but no women are applying. And I was like, yeah, because HR won't let us write interviews that don't have technical requirements on them. So yeah, it's there's a lot that can be done in that space, and that's kind of touching on other questions, but yeah. And then as a leader in the space, I still struggle with a lot of the trying to figure out how I can support people best. And it's a work in progress for sure.
Can I just quickly add to that, Hannah?
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
please do.
I find that really interesting, Teresa. Just when touching on, a lot of you were saying a lot of the males that you worked with were saying, oh, we want to bring females on, and I don't understand why they're not applying. I think that is also another challenge that we can face in a leadership role. Is really we have colleagues who really want to embrace D&I, but are either worried they might offend or just don't even know where to start in terms of how do they approach the subject. And I think it's a challenge and an opportunity for us to really share with them. And it's again like not knowing, you don't know what you don't know, you don't know where your blind spots are, sharing how some of these, you know, sort of established practices or assumptions that they have can actually impact the people receiving them, receiving these messages, how that can actually impact, you know, their intended results. So it was actually really interesting. I was having a conversation with our CEO, and he was, you know, talking about how, you know, in tech, you talk about how, you know, everyone's just, you know, trying to. There's this concept of failing forward, which I think is like really intuitive for some people and not intuitive for others. And you know, he was saying, you know, there's people on our team. We want everyone on our team to sort of embrace that mentality, because taking risks and having that failing forward attitude is really important for us, for startup and scale up. Um, you know, he was sort of saying like, how can we encourage that behavior? And I said to him for a second, like, is there any is you know, let's establish the men that on the team that you think exhibit this behavior, but is there any women on the team that you think exhibit this behavior right now? And he had to really think about it. I'm like, well, why do you think that is? And I think he was kind of taken aback, but it's these assumptions that, you know, he just assumes everyone's equal, but there's these tendencies that I think we just need to bring to the forefront and really educate. And they want to hear that they want to be educated, and they want to be an ally. They just don't know how. So it's for us to sort of educate and help them understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And failing forward is one of those things that I think is more normalized for young boys, or, you know, young males in comparison, right? For whatever reason, I know that's changing culturally. There is definitely shifts happening, and it's improving, but that's amazing that you asked that question, Marjorie. It is important for each of us as female leaders to step up and ask those tough questions, you know, when we see things arise. So yeah, absolutely amazing. Just as a quick reminder, everyone, we've got a few questions left, but we're heading towards the Q&A section. So please don't hesitate to put your questions in that Q&A box at the bottom of the webinar here. I'm really excited to hear everyone's perspective from your questions. But while we do that as well, we have our third polling question here, which is focused around professional development. So a lot of the conversation today has been around how we as women leaders in tech have developed professionally, what we're currently doing. But what about you? Do you currently carve out time for professional development? Your options are absolutely, I make it a priority. I do, more so because the company I work for strongly supports it. I want to, but I'm not sure where to start. I do sometimes, but it's not a focus, or it's on the bottom of my to-do list. I'll just wait for a few responses to come in, a few more responses, and then we'll post the results. Okay. Oh, this one was a little bit more of an even mix. Okay, so 39% absolutely, I make it a priority. That's amazing. That's a great number. That's fantastic. 27% I do sometimes, but it's not a focus. Absolutely. 21% I want to, but I don't know where to start. There was a great conversation with this group actually around that topic earlier this week. 9% is on the bottom of my to-do list, and 3% I do, more so because the company I work for strongly supports it. So that's interesting. Could be that companies maybe aren't strongly supporting it, or just that maybe we're motivated to do it ourselves. It could be either one of those things. So with that in mind, why don't we hop, Chelsea, I'd love to hear from you, specifically, what strategies are you implementing to support the growth and retention of yourself and your peers and other women in technology? What are you finding is working, and what can be improved?
This really ties into my last answer. And I think it's great that we're having a lot of common themes across this. And I think that it does tie into that piece that it's not a one size fit all solution. So I think if I could say one thing that can be improved is exactly that, is that we need to have the open space for the conversations of not only within numerous diverse groups, but each individual in those diverse groups. I know for the women focus of having inclusivity for women in tech or any male dominated industry, there's of course a lot of the conversation of embracing motherhood within certain roles. But there are plenty of women, myself included, who don't see that as part of what their life is going to look like. So that wouldn't necessarily be a solution for a woman in that falls under kind of that classification. But from an organizational perspective, I wanted to change careers. Exactly kind of what I mentioned in the last question, was something that aligned far more with my values. So I chose Cement, has a female co-founder, only one of 12% of fintech organizations that have a female co-founder. And I find that is very likely a direct reason why across each level of our organization, we do have women representation at each stage over double what the industry average is. So I think when literally the table itself has been built by someone that's involved in a diverse group, there will always be a conversation about having more people at that table. And actually, as part of this panel, I wanted to ask our people team in our organization, since we are a startup, we don't by nature have a lot more formalized committees or programs, but I wanted to ask kind of how this is talked about on the people side. And I was really, really happy to hear that with any of the development of the learning or executive programs, there are female only feedback sessions to be asked of how can these sessions and how can this development best suit the needs of the females that are already in our organization. So I think these are examples of where that growth and retention is tangibly embedded into that culture, but also casting that wide net to make sure that the conversation is continuing and it's not just, well, we've done this one program, so we have this solved now. From a personal standpoint, so again, with this conversation, I realized, yeah, we don't have a specific group or committee yet, as we are still growing. So I started a conversation within the organization. A lot of different women reached out to me of their specific stories. I got to learn much more that I hope as I progress to hopefully be able to be in a better leadership position to make sure that this diverse set of needs will be met, but also had a conversation with someone who was highly passionate about putting this together, but didn't feel that they had the time to take it on themselves. So we're going to be having a conversation in a couple of weeks of actually bringing a women's committee together. And I did notice Lisa Doyle's on this call as well. So myself, Lisa, and a woman named Tanya Yeomans, together as part of Geo Women. So as an offset, we noticed this need for other women who were interested within the geoscience community of pivoting into the tech world, but really understood that in the same way that we were saying there's 12 programming languages on a job description, that this is such an immense barrier to women applying to jobs. Well, not only women, but anyone who has more of that diverse set, but someone that wants to come into a different role. So we designed a data-thon that was all about the design of the data problem, was completely flexible to how any team wanted to approach that, and also didn't just have it over a weekend or a week where a lot of women find themselves extremely busy with family priorities. So we set it up over a month. 92% of our participants were actually first-time Datathon participants. And then afterwards, we got some really great feedback of hoping this kind of thing continued. And we've had some conversations about some bigger things in the book. So I'll just say, follow any of us on LinkedIn and hopefully we'll get that messaging out soon.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to see how that all continues to transpire, and definitely follow all of these wonderful ladies on LinkedIn so you can keep track of what they're up to, because they're all doing inspiring things. So Teresa, what are your thoughts on this one? What strategies are you implementing to support the growth and retention of women in tech?
Well, just to add to what Chelsea was saying first, I think, yeah, the Geo Women Datathon that they built was great. And we saw so much more female participation in that than we have in any other datathon that I've been involved in across the city, to the point where the other groups are now saying, okay, how did they do that? How do we get involved with that? And the feedback I've been giving them is the same as what Chelsea just said. Like, have it be a longer period of time. Talk about how important it is to develop the questions. Stop making the focus be on the products that you develop as part of the process or on the code that you write, and have it be more about discussing the problem. Put a non-coding element into it. Have people who don't necessarily know how to code be able to come and just talk about the problem and just use Excel to explore the data. Right now, there's this kind of barrier to, oh, you have to be building cool code in order to be participating in events like this. And it does lead to these events not having diverse perspectives. And it's at the loss of the groups that are involved in providing their data for the event. So yeah, I think it's really good. And Chelsea and Lisa, I need to put you guys in touch with Jeff, because he wants to try and do what you've done for Data for Good, to try and bring more of that diversity element into it. But yeah, and a lot of the stuff I had written about resume development and trying to change the way people are recruiting is part of what I had written down for this question, but I already touched on some of it. The other thing that I do try to do, though, is when I see a tech role out there that I or someone on a team that I'm familiar with is trying to recruit for, I will go out to the community and have one-on-one conversations with women to talk them into applying. Because so much of what I hear when I go and do that is, oh, but it had so many technical requirements, I don't think I'd be a good fit for it. And so I have to keep educating people in the space. And this is one of the reasons why my Women in Data group continues to exist, is that it gives me a forum to be able to say to women, the companies looking for this are not looking for someone who can do all of these things, because they're not going to find that person. If you apply and you have 60% of the skills, you have a strong chance of getting an interview. And even if you don't succeed in that interview, then you've still gained a hugely valuable experience in your career. And I've heard feedback as well from the women about some really toxic data practices, or some really toxic interview practices. So I have a lot to learn from you guys, from the conversation I've heard today. I think I still have a lot that I could learn in order to contribute more around the conversation of how do we change what employers are doing right now? How do we make sure that women are being included in the practices? I think there's a lot of unconscious bias leading to women being excluded. And we know that unconscious bias exists, but knowing how to recognize it and deal with it and work around it is something that they're still struggling. Employers in Calgary are still struggling with that. So I would love to have an offline conversation with anyone about how we get employers to the table to talk to them about women in tech and hiring in tech at all, honestly, because they're terrible at it right now.
And I could just add to that, it's interesting, especially for AI-based products. Diversity is, of course, important from an ethical perspective, but from a sheer business and product perspective, in the case of Cement and Helsum, we're both consumer-driven businesses. So we want to be able to reach the widest amount of people as possible. And how do we expect to do that if we don't have that representation building our products? There's never going to be that actually embedded into the understanding of the machine learning of the consumer if those consumers aren't represented. So it makes sense both from an ethics part and just sheer good business.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's phenomenal to hear all the feedback. I think everyone, there's always room to learn. Just going back to Teresa's point, right? She mentioned that, she has room to grow and room to learn. And I think every one of us will always have room to learn and to grow. And I think there's a comment here which I think is a phenomenal comment just in the Q&A, because we're now headed into the Q&A portion in here, which says intersectionality is very important. I keep hearing people talk about being female in tech. Can we be more intentional and talk about trans allies and use women instead? And I think that is really important, absolutely really important. And I think something that reminder is really critical. So thank you, whoever put that. I just really appreciate you pointing that out and bringing that to attention today. That's awesome. I have a question here from Songha. They've asked, what can people who are not in leadership roles do to support change and encourage other women to stay in tech? Chelsea, I'm wondering if that's something you wanted to speak to as a start, and obviously if any of the other wonderful women want to add in, let me know.
Yeah, I would absolutely say just continuing conversations with women that are within your organization, or just as Marjorie did, challenging different ideas on a deeper level with those who are attempting to be allies. So I think we can recognize when there's women on our team that we do need to support, or women that approach things in a different way. Have that conversation on how you can be more supportive to them about what their needs and their goals are, and likewise kind of communicate what things would be better for you to feel more empowered from your team specifically. I think also doing the research of understanding what a good ally is, so then you can understand where in different ways where people are definitely putting in the effort, but just having those more conversations on how they can do that more effectively can really be done at any level. I would also say joining similar groups. Teresa mentioned the ones that she's involved in, and understanding how different organizations are doing different things and bringing in those ideas to your own that might work for you. So I just say do a lot of self-work and conversations.
And join the Chic Geek career pathing. It facilitates one-on-one conversations with other women in the space, and encourage the people in your network to do that as well. Because I think that having those one-on-one conversations, and it gives you the avenue to support each other and give real feedback about things that we've seen, and help with those conversations around here's where the challenges are, and here's what I've done to overcome them. And I think that gives support that a lot of people just don't have right now.
Absolutely. Hanan, did you want to add anything extra on there?
I do, and thanks, Teresa, for bringing up career pathing. Love that. What I wanted to add also is that often women who are maybe not in leadership positions, because they don't have like a huge breadth of experience, they don't always feel like they have value in being able to give back to someone else. And so I want to correct that and let people know that even if you only have 1.5 years worth of experience within tech, you made some kind of transition from that point into tech that someone else is trying desperately to do as well. So having conversations with women who might be trying to transition or graduate into, or looking into a new role, they may be looking for someone who has your insight. And so never discount the fact that just because you're not in a leadership position that you don't have something to offer someone else. So I just wanted to add what Teresa had been sort of talking about as well. So thank you for letting me do that.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to shift into another question here. So this one says, curious about what the panelists think about the culture of overtime under the table in software. Our company is trying to approach this in creative ways, i.e. statutory requirements on OT don't really make sense for developers or people in the software industry. Can we approach this in a different way, whether that be, flexible work or sabbaticals, etc.? Anything to add on that topic? Maybe Marjorie, that might be one you have some insight on.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think probably companies at different stages probably have a different answer to this question. Um, What we focus on at Helsum is impact, setting the right expectations, and trying to be really flexible with how that work gets done, and hope that that gets us to a better just environment for our team members in terms of what's expected of them and the quantity of work. At the same time, we are a scale up trying to achieve, big, ambitious things, and that does mean a disproportional amount of work for probably a disproportionate amount of reward, we hope, in the end, and a disproportionate amount of impact that you have both on your team, your professional development, as well as on your company. So it's something that I think is something that should always be talked about at any company. But I think depending on where you are at as a company in terms of your growth, what you want to achieve, financial situation, etc., I think sort of the answers to that might be different.
Absolutely. And to add to just a trend that I'm seeing as I chat with my clients and companies in the tech industry in general, is we're starting to see an increase in organizations in Alberta offering unlimited vacation time. So obviously there's caveats to that around, making sure that you're not leaving teams high and dry. And so, and, the work still has to get done, of course. But providing the opportunity for people to take unlimited vacation time has been something that's been coming up a lot more. It's not feasible for every company. I mean, if you work in technology in the operations side rather than the software side, you ultimately are responsible to keep the systems working, and you need people on always available to do that. So it can be much more challenging in those operations related roles to make that possible. But I'm definitely seeing it a lot more in software related companies. So just something from a trend perspective that can sometimes outweigh some of that overtime that does happen in a lot of software organizations. Any other panelists on that one? Are we good to keep going? Keep going? Okay, awesome. So we got a really great thank you here just around transitioning from oil and gas into development. It seems like there's a lot of programs coming up that help with energy sector to moving into the tech sector. Chelsea, is that something that you pursued at all, or did you just make the transition without doing any of those programs?
No, I was in an interesting case where I was working for a smaller company who was very interested in bringing more data forward work in, but then the smaller company got acquired by a larger company. So that's when I was starting to do my master's then, but then my role went to kind of strictly in the geophysics silo. So I lost some of that, but yeah, I would strongly recommend the UCalgary Masters of Data Science program because it's a stackable program. So you can first complete a certificate, then a diploma, then a master's. So it's all kinds of builds on itself. But my idea there was, at the time when I chose that, I didn't know if I wanted to completely pivot, but at least would have allowed me to leverage data within my present role if I wanted to, and I wouldn't have to worry about making a multi-year commitment and could still get something out of it.
That's awesome. That's really great. I didn't know that program was stackable. Good to know. Fantastic. Okay, final question here, probably before we wrap up. It just says, can you share the recording with us so we can share it with our teams and our executives? I'd love to share this with the company's DEI committee. Yes, you will be getting a copy of this recording. You'll get it via email over the next few days here. So absolutely, we will be recording. We've recorded it and we will be sending it out to everyone who's part of the conversation today. So to wrap up here, I have my last one sentence quick question for every panelist here. So in one sentence, just to wrap up, can you tell me what's one easy thing women can do in tech right now after this session to support their professional growth opportunities? So Hanan, you're up first.
Mine's quite simple. Chic Geek does have career pathing. It's a micro mentoring program that helps connect you with other women in tech. So I encourage you to do that as part of your professional development. It's also free at this stage, so please, by all means, utilize it.
Absolutely. All right, Teresa, you're next.
Yeah, mine similarly, I would say join the community. I think joining the community really supported my development because I thought that I was really not succeeding at what I was being asked to do. And by joining the community, I was able to talk to people who could say like, no, this is a problem we all face. It's a real problem. I know it's a bit difficult if you've got young children at home, but right now during COVID, a lot of the events are virtual, and a lot of us are talking about continuing to have some virtual events going forward to support that inclusivity. There's lots, I think there's something like 8 active data related meetups in the city right now. So, and you can go to yycdata.ca to find all of them.
Amazing. That's awesome. Check that out, everyone. Marjorie, one sentence.
I would say, in addition to looking externally, if you don't have a one-on-one with your direct manager right now in your company, set one up and have these regular discussions with your manager just to talk about what your career could look like. Ask questions, challenge assumptions. You can do that both, outside your workplace, but particularly within your workplace as well.
Amazing. And Chelsea, last but not least.
I'm going to cheat and put an ad in. So I would say get really introspective about what your values are. See how that's currently in line at your present organization. If not, try and make it at your organization or find an organization that better does that. It's the best decision I've made, was just to have that time to think about it and to do that. My second part, which is what I am actively practicing, is get comfortable sucking at stuff. Like in your development journey, try not to focus on wanting to achieve at it right away, because I think this is an inherent women bias as well, is just if I'm not doing it amazingly, I don't want to do it at all. Just practice on developing for the sake of the exposure of it, because that will take you miles.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we're 1 minute over. I know there's people probably dropping off, but before we sign off, I want to thank each of our wonderful panelists for providing insight and expertise today. It was an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful to have been a part of this today. Big thanks also to everyone who is here and took their time out to join this event. Hopefully you all were able to take something that you can action right now to help continue to promote your career and those of your peers and the professionals around you. So take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.